What do you do with these bands for collaborations?
Just depends on the band. Like we're working with a band called Evanescence right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Heard of them.
Yeah.
They're kind of big.
That's a big band.
Kind of big.
They're kind of big, and it's been really fun just because they're such cool fucking people.
That's awesome. Do you put like Evanescence like right on the bottle or something?
Yeah.
How is that?
Yeah, we
that's what the extent of the collab is, or how,
Oh no!
what's the collab?
They came to the distillery. We've been drinking whiskey together for a year now, sending them draft whiskeys, talk about what they want. What do they want here? We send out samples. We talk about them. We critique them. We change the recipe based on the conversation. Move on to the next round. We're getting ready to send out, which I think may well be the final round right now.
Yeah,
because like we're really happy. We were really happy with one of them on the last one. Like everybody really liked it. Amy and all of us at the distillery liked it, which is like the base.
right.
That obviously we're not going to release without the band being all on board too. And so like Amy was really on board, and like everybody in the band was like, "Yeah, this is really fucking good." And I'm like, "Well, let's try one more round. Let me try a couple other things. See if we can do something a little bit." Like I'm happy with this. But let's see.
Yeah, well, the production time for spirits is not instant in the same way that leather that Nick makes is a long lead time for things. So I'd imagine that making something special for a collab like that, what's the minimum lead time that it would take? You're talking about a year of process, right?
For the most part, we have to work with already aged whiskey.
Yeah.
So it's tweaking this or tweaking that or finishing here. Like trying to go from a collab from grain all the way to a bottle doesn't work.
Right.
It's 5 years from, hey, we'll try this and come back in 5 years. Like,
yeah.
And if we don't like it, then we're going to do it again. Like, no,
I know we've been talking here a bit, but we haven't technically started the show.
That's fair enough. Yeah, it's just conversations.
Are you feeling like you're ready to start for real now?
Yeah, I'll start for real. I'm born ready, brother.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Full Grain Podcast. Today, we've got Paul from Fuse Spirits. I'm here with Nick Horwey. My name is Phil Callis. Before we get into it, I just wanted to give a little quick reminder. We need some help. We've started the show here. It's a new show, and we're looking to get our audience a bit wider. So if you like what we're doing here, maybe today with our guest being into craft spirits, if you know somebody that's into craft spirits, send them the show here. We're on all the podcast places. We're on YouTube. Additionally, Nick and I are looking to do more Q&A episodes.
Yeah, we like doing those. Those are fun.
Nick told me that's his favorite thing. I was looking through our emails. We've got some people that have asked questions. Send more questions if you want. Anything that we can talk about, we will answer your questions. The email address is fullgrainpodcast@gmail.com. Paul, I'm so glad that you're here.
Yeah, glad to be here, man.
And speaking of needing help, I really would like your help to understand spirits better.
Awesome.
I was curious about how I should think about a spirit, coffee maybe that we're drinking now, any liquid that I'm drinking. Tell me how you think about your appreciation for that smell, taste. What's your methodology for assessing a quality of something like that?
Well, I mean, I think you always start off with, like when I'm assessing the quality of various liquids, I'm always going to start off with color. Color tends to be a really piss poor example of the quality or the flavor, but I really like good colors. I'm very visual. And so it's a little bit of an affectation, and I'll freely agree that it's an affectation, but I like it. So if I'm drinking coffee, it's probably a bad example because coffee color tends to be pretty consistent. But at the same time, sometimes it can be a little creamier black. Sometimes it's a little darker black. Sometimes a little more brown. And so you can start getting some understandings of what it is. When you're talking about spirits, in particular whiskey, which is kind of my focus, especially, you look at the brown in the whiskey, and sometimes it's a little bit red, and sometimes there's a little mahogany color to it. And I greatly personally enjoy that, and so I like that. And then you start in with your nose. A very large fraction of your experience with a beverage doesn't actually come from your mouth. It actually comes via your nose. And so if you're overlooking the smell and the taste, or if you're overlooking the smell, like you're missing out on a lot of your potential enjoyment on that, because that's just the way the human nervous system works. With spirits, it can be a little more challenging because the high ABV can be a little bit jarring to your nasal passages. And so if you are an inexperienced spirits drinker, which is there's
Raising my hand,
right,
yeah.
and there's no shame in that. It's a fantastic thing. And like spirits should not be a scary thing. Like we want you to come check the stuff out. Like come join the fun. Spirits are fun. Like don't be intimidated just because it's high proof. But like one of the big tricks for being able to smell the whiskey better is to have your lips just a little bit open. And various people tell you just want to purse them, just like a little bit of
like you're whistling or something.
like a whistle. Other people will be like, no, you want to have your mouth open, like a little bit, like and like other people will be like, like I to me like the wide open is a bit much. But hey, if that's what works for you, man, that's like don't be ashamed,
Right.
Like I'm also a professional. Like I can put my nose right into a glass and it's not going to burn my nose because my nose has been burned out. So this is not a shame situation, and don't be embarrassed. Like
honestly, I mean, if I'm being real with you, I'm kind of like having somebody like you here. I am a little bit embarrassed with my remedial understanding of the topic. So that is why I want to learn. So just a quick anecdote is I went to wine country in California with my dad and his wife, and they were teaching us how to taste wine. And one of the things that they showed us was you kind of like put your head down, and then as you drink, you sort of slurp and like aerate it a little bit. So something like that was really helpful for me. And then they told me like what to think about. I would like to know this. Is it the similar thing for spirits as well? Or
I think it's similar. I think the different ABV is a little bit different. And so like, for spirits, I would not recommend slurping. You're welcome to. There's no wrong answers here. But for me, like, again, like, start with the color, second nose, and then have your mouth open just a little bit. And then when your first sip, instead of slurping, what I'd recommend is take the absolute smallest amount that you can. Because what you're trying to do is calibrate your tongue for the high proof spirit. You're not trying to taste it. You're just trying to get your tongue ready for high proof. And if you just like the literal smallest amount you can put in your mouth, it just sets your mouth as like, okay, so there's no burn. If you just have like the smallest half a drop, it doesn't hurt your tongue, but it gets your tongue ready for when you next have a sip. Like don't shoot it. Just take this, take the smallest sip you can.
I always feel like with higher ABV stuff, it's kind of like spicy food. Or like if you're gonna eat something like a beer and wine is like more like something that's not spicy, and then that's like I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. I did never even thought about it that way, but take a small amount so you're like ready for the spiciness that's coming. You're not just gonna like take a shot of sriracha. You're gonna like take a little bit.
Take
first.
a small amount, and like if you're trying a spirit you haven't had before, look, first try it neat. Next, add just a drop of water. Then add a little bit more water. Maybe toss in an ice cube if you want to chill it down a little bit. Make it in a cocktail. Like there's no right or wrong way to drink spirits. It's just how you like it. Some people like it in Coke. Other people don't. Some people like ginger ale. Other people don't. Some people drink neat. Other people drink it on ice. There's no right or wrong way. It's just a question of how you like it. And so I just recommend is, hey man, like start off as pure as you can. Just drink it neat. Now play around with it and see how you like it best.
So when you say put some ice in it, which is something that I do, how does that affect the liquid?
So when you put ice in, a couple things are going to happen. And I think the couple things that are going to happen are actually really cool. The first thing, if you're using ice, is it's going to drop the temperature, which that's just kind of to me, the temperature is really a personal preference. If you like it a little bit colder, if you like it a little bit warmer. I personally tend to like it a little bit colder. I don't really want it cold per se, but taking a little bit of that room temperature off and bringing it down a little bit, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
how do you achieve that? Just like one cube or something? Like
you could do one. I could deal it like one of the big cubes, and here's where you're going to start going off the deep
All
end
right,
here.
We're getting there.
But that's going to change your dilution then. And so, like if you're putting ice in your whiskey, what I think the cool thing is that you get more and more water in over time as that ice cube melts, and so your whiskey is going to change flavor from the second you get it until the minute you finish it. You're going to be drinking a different drink every single time you sip it. and that's cool. Or maybe it's not, depending on what you like.
Right.
But I think that's really cool. And if you look at actual science, which it's 2023, if you believe in science, that's that's up to you. I'm not judging you. But scientifically, adding just a drop of water actually improves the whiskey. So, like, add water, even if it's just a little drop.
What do you mean by improve?
Because in whiskey, there's a whole bunch of chemicals that are going on in there. And so when you add just a drop of water, it changes the chemistry of the whiskey, and it can really open up. It opens up and releases a lot of congeners and esters that are kind of trapped in the high proof. And so if you just break that up and interrupt it, the flavors just really get a lot bigger. And so even if you don't like watering down your whiskey, I always recommend just the smallest drop. And as we were talking about visuals earlier, one of the coolest things I like about putting a little bit of water in whiskey is if like you hold the glass up to the light and you just do a little drop in there, you can watch the flavor release because you get this looshing. And it looks really cool. Maybe I'm just kind of a hippie, but like it just looks really cool. So next time you try it, like watch the water go into the whiskey and you'd be like, oh shit, look at that.
So you say, like if I had an ounce of whiskey, maybe like an eyedropper amount of water, like how much?
Even just one drop out of
like
an eyedropper.
Little tiny baby amount.
And again, like put as much water in as you want, but even just the smallest drop, you'll be able to watch the loosh. And realistically, you're going to go, ooh, I got to do that again.
How do you spell that word?
Louche.
Because I've always wondered what the term.
It's usually used in the context of absinthe.
Yeah.
But there's no it's
a good word.
I don't know why it has to be used in absinthe. I'm sure it happens at the tannery too. Like if you mix different chemicals, they're going to loosh out. Like something's going to loosh.
I don't know what that word means.
It has a really good definition.
Let's hear it, Nick.
Disreputable or sordid in a rakish or appealing way.
Ooh.
Good. I approve. That's good. That's a good vocab word.
More vocabulary words in that vocabulary word.
That's good.
And that's why you listen to the podcast for education.
I like it.
The water drop changes the flavor. It opens it up. And then if you were to use ice, like you're saying, the chilling effect is helpful. You're starting to get into the larger cube. Yeah,
so larger cubes, it's just a little bit of physics. Like the larger the cube, the slower it's going to melt, so the slower you dilute. In particular, see, like if you go in like a high-end whiskey bar, like they'll have like the best rocks are like the one giant spherical rock. Like I love those because they melt super slow. Like you get your temperature down, but it doesn't just melt effectively instantaneously, which is nice if you're drinking like a really good whiskey. You don't want it to turn into 10 proof immediately.
I see.
It'll go a little bit slower so you can sip and enjoy your whiskey. And realistically, I don't think I've ever been able to watch an entire spherical cube melt. Like these things are massive.
Right. And understanding that there is no right and no wrong way, do you prefer to pour the spirit or the whiskey over that ice, like on top of the sphere? Or do you put it in after you poured it?
For the most part, I like to pour it in on top of the sphere, but primarily because otherwise you can splash.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
The splashing's not good because then you're spilling your whiskey.
Yeah, it's not cheap. And there a lot of effort went into making that thing that we don't want to just waste.
That's alcohol abuse, man.
Yeah. I want to know a little bit about the scent and the flavor. And I feel like when I've tasted things in the past, people say, don't you taste a little bit of that cherry wood or whatever? They can make me sort of hallucinate what I think I might be sensing. How much of that is crap? Is that real?
I think it depends on the person, but yeah, there's definitely truth in there. And it's also true that like the three of us could be drinking the exact same dram and we're all going to have slightly different tasting notes. And so even as a professional, like I can come up with a note and maybe it makes total sense to you because maybe we have shared experiences. Like, I mean, the three of us probably have relatively similar shared experiences because we're all from a particular area. And like, you know, we all know 588-2300, like, you know,
Empire, right?
Yeah. Like we have shared experiences, but then like, you know, I'll go and I'll travel over to like the UK and they'll say, oh, this tastes like something I've never heard of. I'm like, maybe. I don't have any idea what that tastes like. You're probably right, but I don't taste that because I'm not familiar with that.
And we were like, oh, this bourbon tastes like Portillo's.
Right. Yeah, like, you know,
Like, what are you talking about?
we were tasting a product the other day, like, oh, it tastes like a Polish sausage. Or it was a beer last night. And I'm
Not
like,
everybody's going to get that, yeah.
now I was going to get a Polish sausage, but like the three of us might get it.
100%.
Hints of celery seed.
Yeah. It tastes a little bit of sport pepper going on in there. But you go and try to talk to somebody from California about what a sport paper tastes like, and they're big, fuck's a sport paper.
Yeah.
We were talking about Yardinera with one of my guys in New York. He's like, "What's Yardinera?" I'm like, "Fuck me, Yardinera. We got sweet. You got you get the
Apparently
peppers.
that's like a very specific Chicago. Like, doesn't exist anywhere else.
Which was news to me, right? Like I was saying, like we've got these shared experiences because we're all Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But you leave Chicago and you go down, and people want to talk about, it tastes like sweet tea. I'm like, what does sweet tea taste like, man? I'm not saying it doesn't taste that way, but I have no idea. And then the other thing that's also weird about tasting notes is it can even matter. Like, so we're all drinking the same coffee right now, but if I was drinking this coffee and you were drinking tea and you're drinking a latte, we could all have different tasting notes based on what we've been eating or drinking that day.
Mm.
And so, like, if I find that if I have an Italian beef with a bunch of Yardinera, fucks up my palate.
Mm-hmm.
And my palate gets destroyed for several hours. Not destroyed, but like it will alter the way I taste. You get a bunch of onions, you get a bunch of garlic, a bunch of coffee. And so you want to be mindful of that. One of the cool things about coffee is it actually tends to neutralize the nose as well as palate.
Really?
So you can kind of reset. And so when I'm doing professional tastings and trying to work on blends or any sort of whiskey, I will usually have a cup of coffee beans and a cup of coffee right next to me, so that in between, every time I nose a dram, I'll go grab the coffee beans and then reset my palate.
Oh, that's really cool.
And that works for me. Like, you might have something that works better for you, and that's awesome. But for me, it's coffee beans. And then I'll drink coffee to kind of reset in between.
That's really neat. Help me understand too. When I was saying that it might be some BS in there of like, oh, I'm tasting like hints of smoked applewood or whatever.
No, but that's absolutely true. And it's just kind of going slow. Mm-hmm. And so you'll think about it, like as you sit and drink the coffee.
About it.
Just go slow and like think about the flavors that you have in your mouth, and then think about what it might remind you of. And it may well be that it's super personal, that this flavor reminds me of the candy that Grandma used to give me when I was a good boy, and that's a valid tasting note. It may well be that you can taste, cherry wood. Like Few happens to use cherry wood in several of our products, and so I would certainly expect you to be able to go, it tastes like a little bit like cherry wood, because you got that kind of woody flavor, but maybe it's a little bit sweeter, and it doesn't taste like other wood. And you're drinking whiskey, your common tasting notes are going to tend to be, especially for bourbon, vanilla and caramel. And those all make sense because those are byproducts of the wood degradation of the spirit in barrel. That's why, vanilla tends to be a big whiskey flavor, is because high proof spirit going into barrel releases a compound called vanillin in the oak.
Really?
And so vanillin, you can probably guess what vanillin tastes like.
Is that very specific to oak and only oak, or?
I wouldn't say it's only oak. It's certainly a byproduct of a lot of different woods, but oak is by far the most common wood for whiskey aging, and wine for that matter. Yes, there's others. I'm not saying it's exclusive, but
I see.
Like if it's lower than 98%, I would be shocked.
Yeah. When I think too about, sorry to exclude you, Nick, for a moment.
I'm just listening.
I'm too considerate of you in these episodes.
Yeah, just keep going. I'm listening.
When I think about flavor too, is it's not like a singularity of taste. There's a sort of time aspect to tasting.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, like like I visualize my tongue almost like the tip of my tongue until like the back of my throat. It's like that's how the time progresses of that taste. Maybe you can help me explore that.
Sure. I mean, well, also don't forget that your taste buds actually regenerate it's actually a crazy short time period. It's like 14 or 28 days.
What?
It's like the biology is beyond my pay grade, but it's
like
really
scrape
bizarre.
off your tongue and then they grow back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Like I find that just wild, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not a biologist, and if somebody's out there is going, "No, you're fucking wrong." Like, yeah, I'm sorry, man. That's just what I was told. I make whiskey for a living. You got to give me a little bit of credit or a little bit of leeway. Maybe not credit, but
right, yeah.
Go a little soft on me. I'm not an expert, but yeah, I mean, you get different. Like you could some whiskeys you'll taste a little bit more up front. Some will be more in the middle. Some will be more in the back, and that's just partially kind of a representation of the real complexity that is in whiskey or wine or realistically beer, because you've got all these different elements that are going to be going into that beverage, and every single one matters, whether it's the grain that you use, whether it's the yeast that you use, it's the barrels that you use. Realistically, it's the time frame it's in the barrel, it's how the barrel's treated. Is it charred? Is it toasted? How heavy was the char? How deep is the toast? All of these things matter because it's really just this bundle of chemicals that are all wrapped up into a beverage, and then you're tasting each and every one of them. And some of them are going to taste good to me. Maybe they don't taste as good to you. And some of the stuff that tastes good to Nick maybe doesn't taste as good to me. And that's why different people like different things. But, the chemistry that's in whiskey or beer or wine is super, super complex and realistically changes over time. And you're talking about wine and slurping to aerate. Wine is historic. Oxygen is the enemy of wine and the friend of whiskey.
Interesting. And
so if you're a winemaker, one of your goals is to eliminate as much oxygen from contacting the wine as possible. And for whiskey, that is not actually our goal. I mean, we don't want a lot of oxygen touching it because it's volatile, and the more air that touches it, the more it disappears, and the whiskey goes bye-bye, which we don't like. But, oxygen in wine, oxygen will destroy wine.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They made me aerate it. Then I don't know enough about that to understand why.
It's not going to destroy it in your mouth.
Oh, okay. It does seem like you're saying with the drop of water, it does seem to have that same sort of blooming of like opening it up and make it taste more significant.
It opens it up. And so I definitely recommend, I'm not a wine expert. I'm actually personally embarrassed by my level of wine knowledge because it's horrifying. But spirits, small sips, build up into bigger ones. If you like shooting, shoot. But I personally, I don't think I've taken a shot of liquor in 30 years.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
No one actually likes it.
Right. So don't this concept that you have to take shots of liquor is weird. Like, drink your liquor the way you like it. If you like shooting it, man, fuck yeah, man, have fun.
You don't like that Little John song then?
But shot. Hey, if that's fun, man, fuck yeah. Like, have fun. Like, we're making liquor, right? This is not curing cancer. We're having fun. And what we're trying to do with whiskey is bring people together so you can have a good time. Mm-hmm. We want you to share this with your family. We want you to share it with your friends. We want you to enjoy it in moderation and with responsibility. But it's supposed to be fun. Mm-hmm. And if it's fun for you doing shots, then fuck yeah, man, do shots. If it's fun for you to kind of sip it and talk about the notes of cherry wood and sandal, and it reminds you of your grandma's basement, fuck yeah, do that. And if you want to sit there on your back porch with a glass of whiskey and a cigar, fuck yeah, man, that's awesome. Like, there's just no right or wrong way. There is a wrong way, which is to excess. Enjoy it.
I love that. Hey, you started to get into some things that our listeners tend to love from guests, which is precisely how things are done and how they're made, which you started to talk about the chars and the toasting of the barrel. I thought that's neat. I want to put that off for a moment, but kind of keep that in the back of our minds. I would really like to know how you got into this whole thing. Maybe you can give me the origin story. I know a little bit about this.
Sure. Yeah, people ask you, how did you get into distilling?
Yeah,
And
not everybody does that. Yeah.
no, it's really weird. And it's this bizarre little thing that I kind of got into effectively based on a history of making really poor life choices. Um, I I just got really lucky. But I've always had this insane desire to create and make new things. Like we were talking before, I used to be a guitar player. I like making music. I like painting. I'm no good, but but I like making stuff.
And by the way, sorry to derail you, but we have a shared past of making guitar pedals.
Yeah.
I'll show you some guitar pedals that.
Oh, nice.
I started a company that failed, and I think we probably failed for the same reason. Yeah, there's no money there either.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I do constantly think about, because I had a company that built guitar pedals, which on one hand was a success. Like I made a guitar pedal for Lou Reed. Like that's fucking cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I don't know if the company really failed per se, since I just kind of shut it down. It would have failed if I continued on that line. But I don't know that it failed or not. It really doesn't matter. I've certainly failed at enough businesses. I'm not ashamed of failure. I just don't let that. If that was a failure, I don't know. But I just had this personal drive to create and make. And then kind of what ended up happening was my grandfather died, which sadly happens to most of us. But it really struck me because prior to World War II, his family had owned what is now a major brewery in the Czech Republic. If you're up on your world history, you understand that in 1939, the Nazis invaded all of Czechoslovakia. They confiscated the brewery and murdered the entire family in the camps. Brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents, everybody, literally everybody was wiped out, mostly in Auschwitz. And after the war, my grandpa spent the rest of his life trying to get the brewery back, but never did. And so when he died, it kind of struck me that all of this history and this legacy and everything that our family had done pre-1939 was gone forever, unless I do something about it. And, you can raise your fist to the sky and say, why me, and all this. That's not who I am. I just rather, okay, that sucks. Well, start over. We'll build it up again. It's like a kind of like a Midwestern thing, right? Like, oh, okay, well, that sucked. Start over.
Great Chicago Fire. Yeah.
Right. Oh, oops.
Sorry about that. My cow kicking over the lamp.
Yeah, but you start over.
Rebuild your city now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Midwestern thing, right? Oh, okay. Well, you could cry about it, or you can get to work. And so I kind of got to work, and I didn't really want to be in the shadow of a major brewery. I don't like making wine. If you're out there and you like making wine, man, that's awesome. That's not my jam, man. It's okay. Also, while there's really, truly incredible wine being made in Illinois, it's really hard to sell that wine because the consumers just don't get it. And so I kind of looked around, and so this is like 2008. And so I was looking around like the beverage alcohol industry, and I'm like sitting here in Cook County. I'm like, all right, so do I want to make beer? No, maybe not. But I look around, I'm like, okay, so for me to make beer, I'm going to have to make better beer than Goose Island, Three Floyds, Two Brothers, Half Acre, Metropolitan, and I'm just getting started. And I am not going to make better beer than they do. They make incredible beer. Like, okay, well, so maybe I can make beer as good as them. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but just give me that. All right, so I'll just have a better sales team. No, I won't. I don't have any money. So they've got beer that's at best as good as mine. They've got a better sales team. All right, well, I'll have better marketing. No, I won't. I don't have any money. So I've got beer that's the same quality as theirs. Again, give me that. I've got a worse sales team. I've got a worse marketing team. That's not really a recipe for success. I look at wine, hard to sell. It can be hard. It can be difficult to sell. And I look at spirits. I go, spirits are really fun, because primarily spirits are really fun. There's nobody doing it. You can look around the country, and there's maybe 20 or 30 people making spirits from scratch. So that's not competition. That's friends. And we're kind of lucky here in Chicago because like Koval was doing it. It's like there was somebody in Chicago doing what I wanted to do. But again, like that's not competition. They're friends, and they're friends right now. I mean, like,
Right.
my kids have babysat their kids. Like that's not competition. That's friendship. And this just seems like something I need to do, and so I chased after it because I've always been really good at making bad life choices. So
it doesn't seem to be, I mean,
it just worked out.
Objectively does not seem to be a bad life choice now.
In hindsight,
what is it, 12 years later?
Like we've been on the market now almost 12 years. And I mean, I can always joke there's a terrible life choice, but this one worked out.
It seemed to work, yeah.
This one worked, I mean, but like, making guitar pedals was awesome. That was also a life choice. It maybe wasn't the best life choice.
You know what, though? You're kind of onto something there. You learned something from all those failures, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So at the end of the day, what's the point of life? You just have some joy. So it was worth it.
Right. I'm a dad. I know we're all dads, and I always try to teach my kids that there's no such thing as a destination. Like we all share the exact same destination. What we don't share is the journey. Mm-hmm. And so if you can find the journey that you like, which is what I've always tried to do, is find that journey that I want to be on, that works. And I was talking with a friend of mine, like, oh, you've got such a great career plan. I'm like, I assure you that I do not have a career plan. I've got a lot of things, but a career plan is not one of them. But what I do have is a nice journey.
Well, on that journey, how did you come about? Did you teach yourself how to make spirits? Did you get some instruction? What's that like?
I effectively taught myself how to make whiskey. I made beer at home for a long time. Like I said, I know how to make beer. I could make a pretty decent beer. Maybe not quite to the level of like a Goose or so on, but again, give me the credit. Say I could have figured that one out. Yeah. I do think I could have figured it out. But whiskey is just a lot more fun. So I started, and then I'd kind of figure out what I was struggling with, like what aspect am I struggling with? And then you can go do some research and figure it out, because we're not actually inventing a wheel here, right? People have been distilling spirits for thousands of years, going all the way back into Middle East and the Arab societies that were doing it, and alchemists in the Middle Ages. Like this is not new stuff. People have solved these problems before. And I'm not so good with books because I'm really much more of a hands-on guy. Again, create and make and do what you're going to do. So books don't do it for me. But if you know what your specific problem is, books are an awesome resource. Mm-hmm. And, other people out there can actually read books and learn from them. I can't.
How do you make a spirit?
Well, first you ferment. You figure out what's your base going to be. Is it going to be fruit? You need a sugar source. So your sugar source can be sugar, in which case you got rum. It can be fruit, in which case you pretty much have like brandies or eau de vies. Or it can be grain. It could be agave, so you got tequila. It could be potatoes, which is realistically mostly going to be vodka or Starka or any number of things. And you can kind of look at human history, and you can look at the wide variety of fermented alcoholic beverages that people have, and it tends to be whatever fermentable happens to be nearby. So if you live in here with a bunch of potatoes, well, most of your spirits are going to be potato based. You live in the United States, kind of outside of like Pennsylvania, Maryland, it's probably going to be corn. If you're in France or certain areas of France, you're probably talking wheat. That's just the reality of the situation. And so anything that you can ferment can be fermented. Anything that you can ferment has been fermented. And if it's been fermented, it has been distilled because, well, frankly, historically, you could distill it so that it weighs a lot less.
Really? Just to get that alcohol transported more or less expensive. And mm-hmm. Okay.
Like, if you transporting 2,000 pounds of grain, 2,000 pounds of grain weighs 2,000 pounds.
Oh, good math.
There's no math on the examination today. But just without having to show my work to the professor, just take my word for it that 2,000 pounds of corn weighs 2,000 pounds. But if you take 2,000 pounds of corn and turn it into a bottle of corn liquor, it's going to weigh a lot less than 2,000 pounds. And so it's a lot cheaper to transport 2,000 pounds of corn in whiskey form than it is in corn form.
I see.
How does the base material inform the finished taste? Because I'm trying to figure it out scientifically in my brain. So if you're taking the sugars out and fermenting those, and that's what's making the alcohol, and then you're distilling it to remove impurities, what is staying in the spirit at that point that's informing the finished flavor? Because brandy and whiskey and vodka and it tastes different. So is that from the fruit grain combo, or
I'm not trying to dodge your question, but frankly, it's all of it.
Yep.
So partially it depends on what your fermentation stock is. Is it corn? Is it sugar? Because again, whiskey and rum taste different. Next, it's going to be how are you fermenting it and what yeast you're using. Is it going to be a high fermentation temperature, a long fermentation temperature? Are you going to let it go into a malolactic ferment? Like, there's all these, as a whiskey maker or wine maker or beer maker, there's all sorts of artistic decisions you can make about how you want your product to be. And those decisions are then going to control the flavor. So feedstock, fermentation. And then when you're distilling something, the distillation matters too. Like, are you going to distill super high so that you're removing everything that has flavor? Because you can call them impurities, and you're right, but you can also call them flavors, and you're also right.
Volatile flavor adding agents.
Yeah, some of your impurities taste good. Some of your impurities are poison. Some of your impurities are not. And so, when you're distilling, you're bringing in, like when you ferment, you're creating methanol and all sorts of really nasty byproducts. So if you're drinking beer and wine, you're drinking methanol. No, it's in relatively small amounts, but it's still in there. So, but then when you distill it and you're concentrating that methanol, all of a sudden there's a hell of a lot more. So like when you distill, like you're getting rid of some things and you're keeping some things, and that's part of the artistic decision as the distiller. That do you want your whiskey? I'll just talk about whiskey here because that's what I do. If you want your whiskey to be a little bit lighter in flavor, you're going to distill a little bit higher. So you're coming off the still, let's say maybe 155 proof. If you want something that's a little bit heavier, so we're going to come off the still about 130 proof. We're going to keep a lot more of those flavors than somebody distilling at 155. Or if you're trying to distill vodka and you're over 190, like there's really not much left. And so it's really an artistic decision. But those flavors are going to come from everywhere, from grain to fermentation techniques to distillation techniques to any aging techniques. Are you putting water in? Is it aged hot? Is it aged cold? How much oxygen does the distilled spirit have access to? Like all of these things are relevant to the flavor and go pretty far beyond what the average drinker cares about. But I think it's really cool because this is what I do for a living, so I better think it's cool.
It is cool.
I mean, I think you're just touching the iceberg or the tip of the iceberg with some of that there. Let's say you were to take the same distillation method and your goal is to hit the same, you said the output of proof. Mm-hmm. You're going to hit the same proof. And say we're going to take corn versus wheat. What is the result of that? I mean, I guess in terms of flavor and smell, why would you choose one or the other, I suppose is the question.
So, I mean, if you're going to be, like, if we're going to hit the exact same distillation proof and you're going to have corn versus wheat, which is, these are great comparisons. Corn is stereotypically going to be a little bit sweeter. You're going to have a lot more yield. So you're going to get a lot more alcohol off of that. So that, you're just hitting the same proof, but it's going to go for a lot longer. Wheat is going to be still with some sweetness a little bit, but to me, wheat tastes softer. It's still sweet, but there's a little bit of a softness to it, and I think that the texture of a wheat distillate is a little like the mouthfeel is going to be a little bit silkier. And here's where you were talking about texture is kind of like dancing about architecture. It just doesn't work. But, these are the words that I'm going to find to describe it. And so it's a little like wheat's going to be a little bit silkier. If you were to swap it out and try to compare it to like a rye, rye is going to be a lot spicier. So you'll think cornbread, wheat bread, rye bread. Cornbread's going to be a little bit sweeter. You're going to put that with your some chili or something. So you got a big spicy chili with some cornbread off to the side, and you're going to be really happy with that.
Oh yeah.
But if you had that chili with a rye bread, maybe it doesn't quite fit as well. But let's say you've got a big old slab of mayonnaise colored beef. You're not going to put that on cornbread, man. You're going to put that right on some really nice seeded rye, and you're going to be so happy.
I see. So the bread analogy is probably the most appropriate way to think about the grain you're using for your mash.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a very common one in the world of whiskey, as you're talking about, like comparing bourbon, which is mostly corn, to rye whiskey, which is mostly rye. The classic comparison is just going to be cornbread versus rye bread versus wheat bread. And, wheat bread's great, but maybe it's a little too healthy for a lot of people. Cornbread, that stuff's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
That's pretty good. And that rye is awesome.
You were kind of hinting at too with potatoes or vodka, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you could make it with any, I don't know, grain, a root, any sugar source.
Sure.
You were saying though, once you get to that very high proof, it's almost like you're wiping everything out in terms of flavor. Is that how you feel vodka? Were you hinting that vodka is more or less flavorless?
Well, actually, by law, vodka is literally defined as flavorless and odorless.
Okay.
So by law, vodka has no flavor. Now,
how are there different vodka brands? Good question. Okay.
I'm gonna. This is a live mic.
Yeah, we can cut this one out too.
But yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, you're taking out a lot. You're taking out a lot of that flavor. Maybe I won't say all necessarily, but like that's why you have different vodka brands, like your potato vodka. Great vodka. It's gonna be a little bit creamier. You're gonna have that potato-y flavor, for lack of a better word, and then you can compare it to like a corn vodka, like say, for example, Tito's or any number of other corn vodka brands. You can compare it to a wheat vodka, like it's Belvedere's wheat, I think. And if I'm wrong, I apologize to Belvedere. There are definitely wheat vodkas out there, and they're all going to be a little bit different. But I mean, you've got vodka you can make from milk now. They got these vodka companies that
Really?
The milk byproducts. They ferment them and turn it into vodka. Spotted Cow, if you're looking on Google, or Tipsy Cow, I think.
Spotted Cow's the beer, right?
Spotted Cow's the beer. Sorry, I apologize to our friends up north of the Cheddar Curtain.
Well, you shouldn't apologize because we're not even allowed to buy it here. They don't distribute.
Yeah, well, it's still the number 7 selling beer in the country.
Is that right? Spotted Cow is? Good
Wow.
for them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they sell more beer in Wisconsin than virtually every other national brand.
Wow, I think that says a lot about our buddies in Wisconsin.
They are. They do
They
tend to
appreciate their
win.
beer.
They tend to win the drunk estate most often.
So you could be making vodka then with the same grain sources that you're using for your whiskeys.
Sure. My stills won't go there. Like I can't actually physically make vodka, but I arguably could if I had a different gear.
Oh, I see. So completely different manufacturer.
Yeah.
But is there, if you were to take that same grain source, pick a grain, and turn it into vodka versus whiskey, are your margins in terms of profit much different on each of those products? Like, would you, if you could sell infinite vodka, if that's the best profitability, would you just do that?
Well, I did own a vodka brand that went out of business, so you could.
So yeah,
that might tell you a little bit about the margins in vodka, but
because it does seem like my brain was going to this, like, seems like a commodity. You could turn anything into vodka, and it's irrelevant in terms of flavor and tastes. Yeah,
I didn't say that.
Okay. Okay, I said that.
But no, I mean, vodka's a really difficult market that, yes, your COGS are a little bit lower, but your sales and marketing expenses are astronomically higher. And in particular, getting access to various aspects of the marketplace are incredibly difficult for vodka. That it's a very challenging space to play in. Like I said, like I used to own a vodka brand that got killed by COVID, but if you hit it, like if you can hit vodka, oh, it's a beautiful thing.
It seems like you don't have to age it. You don't have to really do too much. Yeah.
It's quick. It's, on a manufacturing side, it's quick. Like you can go from corn to bottle in a week. And so if you're really perfect, you can have a cash flow cycle down to like 45 or 60 days, which, oh my God, as a whiskey maker, that's just incredible. Our cash flow cycles are multi-year. We're looking at, 5, 6, 7 years on cash flow cycles. So, somebody running around here doing like a 45 or 60 day cash flow. I'm like,
are you implying there that you're aging 5 to 7 years?
for the most part, more than that, but yeah.
You're the first person that we've talked to that has a worse situation than I do in terms of how long stuff makes.
But it just takes forever, and it's the cost of business, and it is what it is.
But it's helpful. It keeps people, not to be a jerk about it, but it keeps people that aren't serious about it out of it too. You have to be really serious and want to make it work with those kinds of timelines.
It's very difficult. And that's just, it's CapEx, and, if you want to solve a problem, you can solve it. If that's what entrepreneurs do, is solve problems. And if your problem is cash flow cycles, well, then go solve it. If your problem is that it's really hard to sell and market because it's a fungible commodity product like vodka, well, go fucking solve that problem, man. Go figure out your marketing, go figure out your sales, get your price right. There's always room in the market for good brands selling good products at good prices. It doesn't matter what market you're in. The customer always wants a good product at a great price with a good brand, whether it's B2B, B2C. That's what your customer wants. And if you can deliver a better quality product at the same price, or a better quality product at a price that's a little bit higher but justifiable, or your brand is better, or whatever it is that makes your offering better, there's always room in the market for that. There's almost never room in the market for subpar products at premium prices with crappy brands. You might be able to last for a little bit, but your time is going to come.
You can't fool people forever.
Yeah.
What were you doing right before you started Few?
So right before Few, I had the Guitar Effects pedal company, and that was really fun, but maybe it wasn't super fiscally responsible. But it was really fun, and I really liked it, but like terrible business. And then I was also working as a lawyer at the time, which was not a whole lot of fun, and really kind of goes against everything that, just pushing paper across the desk when I want to make and create. I know there's a lot of people out there, probably a lot of people listening are lawyers, and that's awesome, and we love you, but I couldn't do it. It's not a good fit for me.
What kind of law were you practicing?
Mostly patents and trademarks.
Okay.
So, nerdy shit. Like, 'cause I'm a nerd. That's fundamental. That's who I am, right?
Yeah.
I'm just, fundamentally, I'm a nerd. I'm a dorky suburban dad that, loves his kids, We did sell our minivan, so I'm no longer this suburban dad with 3 kids, a minivan, and 2 dogs.
Well, your kids are older now, or a little older.
Yeah.
You don't need to cart them around in seats anymore.
Yeah, now I just give them the car keys and they drive themselves around.
I look forward. I'm not in any hurry to have my kids not be little anymore, but I do look forward to the day of having a vehicle choice not be so dependent on what else is going on in life. But yeah, I get it.
There's pros and cons. Like, I always tell parents of younger kids, like, the stuff that's hard right now gets real easy, and the stuff that is currently really easy gets really hard. Kids are the best.
Yeah.
And hug your babies if you got kids.
Yeah, no, I do. I even when they don't want me to, still hugging them.
Well, it's because it's embarrassing. Damn it, Dad.
Well, I'm not there yet, thankfully.
All right, let me get us back on the rails here. I do think it'd be interesting to go back to some more about the wood, because I imagine making the spirit, the grains are relevant, the methodology of how you're distilling the spirit itself is relevant, and then the aging process. Tell me about the aging of these spirits for whiskey. Maybe focus it down to that.
Aging is certainly super important, and it's a question of wood and time, and both of these things matter. And people, especially in the world of whiskey, people want to talk about the age statement. It's this years old, this many years old, that many years old. And I really don't like age statements because I don't think they really tell you anything. People think it's like this oh, it's 10 years old, that means something. It really doesn't mean nearly as much as people think. Because it doesn't tell you what kind of wood it was in. It doesn't tell you, was it new wood, used wood, was it toasted, was it charred, how much was it charred, was it stored temperature consistent, was it stored temperature inconsistent? There's all these things matter, and just saying, oh, it's 10 years old doesn't tell you anything. And people think it does, and so I think it's disingenuous to talk about age statements. But all these things matter. So at Few Spirits, we use mostly Minnesota oak. The oak is a really important part of the aging process, and so we get our oak from Minnesota. Farther north than most whiskey companies get their oak, so shorter growing season, tighter grain, changes the character of the wood, changes the character of the whiskey. We use a number 3 char, so you get a really nice balance of some really good color, but you also get some really rich flavors, and that flame really has enough time to really char it's the inside of the barrel, but the outer edge of the wood, and that frees up some of that outer layers of the wood to accept more of the spirit coming in, and then it changes the chemistry of the wood that's going in there. High-proof spirit's going in. High-proof spirit is actually a solvent, and so over time, that solvent is eating away at various pieces of the wood, and the charred out shell is going to be acting like charcoal as a little bit of a filter. And there's all these things that are happening inside that barrel that are going to affect. On top of that, we're aging right here in Chicagoland, which if you're from Chicago or if you're not, Chicago gets really very hot in the summer, and it gets pretty chilly in the winter.
Yeah.
It's not as cold as I think people outside Chicago think it is, but it does get chilly. And so that temperature variation is very important to how Few ages our whiskey, because it gives it that kind of Chicagoland flair that you've got these temperature variations, and it matters. It gets, if you're comparing to Kentucky, which is kind of like the big gorilla in the world of bourbon, Kentucky gets just as hot as we do, if not a little bit hotter, but it doesn't get quite as cold necessarily. And so if you go into like the upper reaches of some of these rick houses in Kentucky, you're talking about 130 degrees, 140 degrees. Like, you can't humanly work like that, but the barrels are sitting there getting really nice, and over long term, really nice and warm. Whereas for us, we're going to be getting up to $1.15, $1.20, but we're also going to be getting down into the 30s and 40s in our rick houses. We can't let it go below freezing because we have sprinklers. So we can't freeze our sprinkler lines because sprinklers are important. Otherwise, you go boom.
Yeah, makes sense.
We don't want to go boom.
No.
And so, like, these things all matter. And
what would you say the effect of a heat has on the aging in the barrel versus cold?
I think you're going to get into questions of religion at that point.
Yeah, it's like mystery science and some of it.
There is a lot of science to it. So realistically, the shorthand would be that your whiskey's really maturing a lot faster in heat. But if you don't have cold in there, it won't mature as well, at least to my mind. Partially because of and here's where we're going to go way into the deep end here. The oxygen levels that are in the spirit change based on temperature. And so as the temperature goes down, more and more oxygen can get absorbed into the spirit. And then as that spirit warms up, that oxygen is a catalyst for some of the reactions that lead to maturity. So if you never replenish the oxygen levels that are in that spirit, you never get more. That's all you get. Whereas if you heat it up and cool it down, more oxygen comes in, then you've got that as a catalyst for more of the chemical reactions. But that's way deep into the science.
Is that?
No, that's where we need to be.
Yeah,
now.
Is that the oxygen that's just inside the barrel? That's in there with the spirit as it's aging, just like that little bit of.
It starts off with the oxygen that you put in. Obviously, you open up the barrel and there's atmospheric air in there. You put in the spirit, it's going to force out most of the air, but some's going to be left. But oak barrels are porous, and so air is coming in and coming out slowly all the time. And so, especially as time goes on and temperature changes, also the volume of alcohol is very dependent on temperature. So as your temperature rises, the volume expands. As the temperature decreases, the volume shrinks. And so you have air being shoved out and the whiskey being shoved into the barrel. And then, the whiskey kind of comes out because the volume shrinks, which then sucks more air coming into the barrel through the porous wood. So it's all of the above.
That's awesome.
Makes a lot.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like it's almost like it's breathing, so it needs the different temperatures in order to complete that cycle.
And so for whiskey, again, it's different than wine. Like this is, winemakers try to eliminate as much of that oxygen as they can within reason. Again, it's still barrel aging wines, etc. But that's one of the reasons why you're going to tend to not see wines aged for, say, 10 years. It's way too much oxygen. What happens when when you get exposed wine to air and you get vinegar?
Yeah, it's more perishable.
Right. And none of this is good or bad. It's just the nature. And when you're in the business, these are the things that you work to control. For spirits, we actually like having the oxygen in there because it gives us better quality spirits.
I'm hearing you on the aging time length as well, where you say 10 years is not. It's interesting, but not enough of the story. Mm-hmm. And it's almost feeling like our region of Chicago and the Midwest here. It's sounding like the temperature, natural variations and seasonality of temperature in our region might even make it a perfect region for barrel aging.
Well, historically, most bourbon was actually made in Illinois.
Really?
Nobody knows that, but that's historically that's actually true. You go back and outside of Peoria was the number one bourbon distillery in the country.
Really? Yeah. What was it? Tell me about that.
That's kind of what I know.
Oh, no name of it. It was just like
it's in my head somewhere, but it's not on the tip of my tongue.
This was pre-prohibition.
Pre-prohibition,
got it.
And then prohibition. Certainly Kentucky took over, but Illinois is a fantastic place to make whiskey. It fundamentally is, and most whiskey experts, like distillers, people that make whiskey, will tell you that the sweet spot for bourbon is 6 to 8 years. Depends on your palate. Some people like a little bit younger. Some people like a little bit older. There's no right or wrong answer. But once you start going beyond 8 years, a lot of whiskey experts will tell you that the whiskey starts getting over-oaked. Now, that's not going to be true for Scotch. And why is that not true? Well, bourbon uses brand new barrels. Scotch uses used barrels. So Scotch, you're not going to have nearly as much wood influence. Scotch tends to be aged pretty temperature consistent because it tends to be in Scotland, where the temperature, yes, it varies, but not like Kentucky, not like Chicago. And so you can look at like a 10-year Scotch, and that might be a very, very young Scotch, but it hasn't had a brand new barrel and it hasn't had temperature variations. And so it might mature a little bit differently. And then maybe you've got a whiskey that was in a first use barrel or a second use barrel or a third or even a fourth use barrel. And so you can see these 25, 30-year-old Scotches that are, they kind of color like this table or even lighter because it was in a neutral barrel for 30 years.
Like a light blonde color.
Like a light blonde. And that's not, like I said earlier, color is not necessarily the best indicator of quality, even though we all like a really good color whiskey, and that's proper to enjoy the good color. But it's not always necessarily going to be a great indicator of the quality. Or even in bourbon, most of the color comes in the first 6, 8, 9 months. Now, a 9-month-old whiskey may or may not be the best whiskey on the world, but it's going to have a really nice color.
Mm. I've noticed you've been referencing some of my favorite stuff, bourbon, and then you just mentioned Scotch. It's my understanding that you can only make those two products in certain, I don't know if it's a county in Kentucky or I forget what the laws are.
Yeah, so Scotch is only made in Scotland under the laws of Scotland. Bourbon is only made in the United States. It's not only made in Kentucky.
Is that right? Okay.
Bourbon has to be made in the U.S., which is why we can make bourbon in Illinois or in Alaska or in Hawaii or in any of the 50 states, and or in D.C. because that is in America. Doesn't always feel that way sometimes, but
so you're saying I could make a bourbon in Hawaii? I mean, if you put all the components there, legally, what is bourbon then?
So bourbon is a distilled spirit, distilled from grain, distilled from at least 51% corn, so majority corn. Few is 70, but it has to be at least 51. It must be distilled to less than 160 proof. So we're talking earlier about, how high you distill changes the flavor. So bourbon has to come off the still less than 160, so you've still got some flavor. A few comes off around 130, but which is under 160. There's no math on the examination, like I said.
Grilling us today.
Bourbon must go into a new oak container, which is typically going to be a barrel, of course, at less than 125 proof, and it must be bottled at more than 80 proof and made in America. That's
Okay.
160, 125, 80, new oak barrel, charred. Did I say charred?
Mhm.
No.
So it has to be charred, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sure somebody out there's going, oh, he fucked this up.
I also came across something about that oak.
Yeah, oak barrel.
It's like a particular type of oak, right?
Actually, if you read the statute, it just says oak.
Okay.
It is 99.9% of bourbon is aged in American oak for a number of reasons, one of which is cost.
I thought it was something like white oak is what they use.
Well, white oak, yeah.
Yeah.
So
I came across some like economics podcast about this white oak, and they're running like basically 100 years ago, which is roughly the amount of time it takes to grow one of these oak trees. That we're sort of coming around to a point in time now where it has been 100 years since these trees have been planted. I forget the reason what was going on back then, but I think the government like subsidized people growing these trees.
it could be.
And now that this sort of dwindling, are you hearing anything about the supply of oak for the barrels?
So the supply of oak is a consistent and constant battle that is subject to a lot of reporting in the press that people read about. There's actually a world of oak that is growing out there, and plenty of oak.
Okay. I can still drink my bourbon. Okay.
You can drink your bourbon. The issue tends to come based on boom-bust cycles. Yes, in bourbon, but it's much more controlled by the housing market.
Really?
And so the inventory of oak is actually much more an economic factor than a availability factor, because the loggers, there's not enough demand. The loggers don't cut down enough trees. And if the loggers don't cut down the right number of trees, then the inventory goes up or down. And so oak barrels for bourbon tend to be a relatively high value use of the oak, because, well, we pay a lot of money for our barrels. So, but we demand very, very pristine oak. Like it has to be like the staves have to be a certain size, a certain quality, and you want to let it air dry, super straight, ideally air dried rather than kiln dried. And so there's all these things. And so the inventory tends to run based on economic cycles more than actual availability. And so when you hear stories, oh, there's a big oak shortage.
That is what I heard, right?
Which that is technically true, but it's not because there aren't enough oak trees. It's because there aren't enough loggers properly motivated to cut the trees down, because they're not making enough money to justify their cost. When they stop, and then, it's just like ebb and flow of, it's supply and demand economics, not growth.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Most of the good wood companies heavily invest in replacing the wood that they harvest.
Do you have a relationship with a cooper?
Yeah, we've got a great relationship with our cooper. They're up in Minnesota. I actually was just talking to him a couple of days ago, and it's awesome because, like, he and I started doing business together 12 years ago, and he was driving down barrels in the back of his pick-em-up truck for us because we were small and they were small. And then now we're buying, for a while we were buying about a container of barrels every couple of weeks. And, we were running a 40-hour shift a week for him, and we were their number one customer. And so actually we were talking about music earlier too. He made me a speaker out of a used barrel.
Oh man, I bet you that's cool.
Super fun, super cool. And it was just in my trunk yesterday. My daughter said, I was like, well, why did your cooper give you a free speaker? I'm like, I don't know, bought $7 million of barrels off of him. I bought a lot of money of barrels.
That's a lot of barrels.
That's a lot of barrels.
And he takes care of us.
Is he making for more than just you at this point? Or
Yeah, I mean, they make for a lot of other people as well.
Okay, so it's because of my understanding that there's not a whole lot of coopers, like people making barrels either.
Again, ebb and flow of of
Yeah.
economics. Historically, it's really dominated by, there's giants in the industry, Independent Stave Company and Brown-Forman. Brown-Forman, of course, only sells their barrels to Brown-Forman, whereas ISC sells to everybody else. When we started up, there were really just either ISC, Barrel Mill, who we use, and there's another company called Black Swan. And, Black Swan makes great stuff. I just ended up liking Barrel Mill better. All of a sudden, there's a big craft spirits boom, and everybody and their sister had a distillery. And so then people were like, oh, well, I can't open a distillery now, but there's not enough coopers. Maybe I'll open a cooperage. And so now everybody and their sister had a cooperage.
Oh, cool.
And then now those cooperages are now out of business because there's not enough demand.
Oh, not cool.
So which is not cool, but it's like, but it circles back to the same thing. If you've got a great product at a great price and a great brand, there's always room in the marketplace. But if your barrels are too expensive, it's going to be hard for a distillery to buy them. If you're like a friend might open up a cooperage and love the guy, man, but he was charging triple.
Mm.
And I'm like, I can't justify paying triple because my customers aren't going to pay more because they age in your barrel.
Well, how much of a commodity is the barrel?
I would definitely not call it a commodity, but it is super important. But you don't see a lot of whiskey brands talking about their barrel. I mean, they'll talk about the generic qualities of the barrel, that it's American oak, number 3 char. And we do talk about that. And we'll talk about our lineage. It's Minnesota oak and number 3 char. We'll talk about that. But nobody talks about it was from the barrel mill. No one cares.
Mm.
And no one's going to pay more because it's from the barrel mill. They might find like, oh, it's really interesting that you're doing that. But they're not going to pay triple for that bottle of whiskey because it's aged from a particular cooperage. I mean, you make your whiskey, you make your whiskey and you make it well. People will buy your whiskey, but they're not going to pay more because it's from a particular cooperage.
How many times are you using the barrels?
Just once.
Just
that's the law.
Even for the other stuff. I mean, can you use them to not for bourbon?
Yeah,
but you could make whiskey in them.
We could make whiskey in them, yeah. So we could make a single malt whiskey in them, but not many people buy American single malt yet. It's coming.
Yeah.
We used to sell a barrel aged gin that we put gin in the used barrels. Nobody really buys barrel aged gin.
Mm.
So fundamentally, like you end up with these one use barrels that we have way more inventory than we can use again. It's like we've got some really cool whiskeys and sitting in used barrels right now, but they'll probably never see the marketplace. It'll just be stuff that we drink ourselves realistically.
Why is it, or is there a Scotch that exists that's not made, or like a quote unquote Scotch like product that's made not in Scotland?
Yeah, American single malt.
Okay, they put like the peat kind of thing in there too and all that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of peated American single malts. My friends at both Westward and Westland both make a peated American single malt. We've played with peat a couple times. Like we made a peated bourbon one time, and that was fun.
So it's just called single malt?
Yeah, so American single malt would be something that's in a quote Scotch style.
I'm showcasing my ignorance.
It's all good. It's the total market for American single malt
almost
is
like
minuscule.
It's almost like it needs a rebranding, like in the way that the word Scotch exists and the way that bourbon exists. It's like American style Scotch needs like a word, right? You know?
Yeah, you walked right into it. I'm one of the founders of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, and I wrote the law to define what American single malt is.
Okay,
so I agree with you.
What is American single malt is?
So American single malt it's going to be very similar to Scotch because that's what people think. And part of the problem in America is that people think of Scotch as being under the rules of Scotch, but the rules for malt whiskey in America are very different than Scotch. And so the consumer is not getting what they think they're getting. And so we tried to create a way to define American single malt that allowed American single malt makers to be creatively free to create and expand this category, that we're not going to dictate how you make something. while also maintaining the consumer's familiarity with what Scotch is, because if it's too dramatically different, consumers don't understand, and it's not the consumer's job. It's our job to explain what this is, not the consumer's job to discover it. And so, we've been campaigning in Congress now for 10 years, and we're on the verge of actually having it passed into law as to what American single malt is. And the definitions are very similar, but Scotch has to be made in used barrels. American single malt can be made in either new or used.
Why'd you do that?
More creative freedom for American distillers. For better or for worse, the Scotch Whisky Association defines what Scotch is and what can be called Scotch. And to my mind, I think they're pretty overly restrictive in that definition, and it chokes away a lot of the creativity that Scotch distillers could otherwise use. They're Scotch, they can do what they want, but that's my thing. That's my feeling.
So if you were to make the single malt American stuff, does the peat come from here? I guess that's one of the creative decisions that you have. But I guess the question is if you use peat from the United States versus peat from the British Isles, how does that affect the flavor of the single malt?
Oh, it absolutely affects. And I've certainly have friends that bring in their peated malt from Scotland, which is cool. I just don't get it. When Few started making American single malt, I actually went out and looked for American peated malt. And when I started, it didn't really exist because, like, we're talking like one of the next big steps once people had distilleries was, we'll have a malt house. So after we created our recipe, I did then discover some peated malt that you can get from a peat bog up in northern Michigan, but it's also like $3 a pound, and that doesn't financially work.
What is it normally?
When we get our malt, we're paying about 50 cents a pound.
Okay. That's more.
It's a little bit more. And when we use, if you're using 20 pounds, okay, whatever. But we use 4,000 pounds a day.
Sheesh. Yeah.
So that adds up real quick.
I would say.
Real quick. Like, so you can do it once, sure. But how much whiskey do you have then? Like, it's very difficult. And it's great quality malt, to be very clear. I want to use it. I can't afford it.
Yeah.
I'm realizing we've not talked enough about your spirit company. To be honest, and
Few Spirits, at Few Spirits, fewspirits.com.
Yeah, I mean, and I see it everywhere these days. My brother was just doing the Bourbon Trail thing, and actually, my brother Matt is the one that suggested I reach back out to you to have it on the show.
Thanks, Matt.
He was down there doing the Bourbon Trail thing. He's staying at a hotel, and he's like, my hotel had Few Spirits in it.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you should reach out to this guy and talk about how the aging is similar to the aging of the leather. And like, anyways, I feel like I don't know enough about your products. What is the product that you guys are known for?
So we're known most for the Few Spirits Bourbon and the Few Spirits Rye. Few Bourbon's our number one seller by a country mile, but I sometimes think we might be actually a little bit known for our rye. Started about 12 years ago distributing here in Chicagoland. Over the last 12 years, we've grown a lot. We're now about 1% of the market. We're sold in 50 states, 40 countries. I'm not surprised we're down in Kentucky. We got bought by a large Kentucky distillery last year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we love it. Mm-hmm. We love Heaven Hill. Thank you, Uncle Heaven Hill. But yeah, we've been able to grow, and it's kind of one of the cool things about being in Chicago is that, we're a local. Here in Chicago, we're a local whiskey, but what we really are is world class, and we win every award under the sun. Whiskey of the year, this, gold medal there, double gold here. Every critical acclaim you can find. And we're all out of this, we're out of Evanston, Illinois. We're down an alley. And like you were saying, like it's cool. It's cool. Like you've got a tannery in downtown Chicago that supplies the leather for NFL footballs. That's awesome. I remember like the first time I learned that, I'm like, wait, that little place I drive by in Ashland? You shitting me?
That's the
But
thing.
it's awesome.
I'm coming to realize doing these podcasts is there's special people everywhere that we drive past, walk past, ignore on a daily basis. I mean, I think that's part of the story that I like from you. So I need to try. Honestly, I haven't tried your stuff.
I should have brought some. That's on me.
Oh, come on. We'll have you back. You're welcome to come back tomorrow.
I've had a bunch of this. I haven't had anything of yours that wasn't amazing.
Well,
I have to try the bourbon and the rye then. My dad's a huge rye fan, so I'll send him.
Including the gin. I'm not usually a gin guy.
Yeah. Well, we 86 the gin everywhere except Illinois, so
oh, well.
the gin's slowly disappearing.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious, what's a product that you make that you find to be undervalued by the rest of the world?
Oh, definitely the gin.
I should try that too.
But it's, hey, business is business. The whiskey moves and the gin doesn't. So we're focusing on whiskey.
Help me appreciate gin, because I don't love the pine tree, like pine sol gin that I've had in the past. And people have told me, well, don't worry, there's like these other types that are less pine tree. Is yours a pine tree style?
No. So the Few gin is very specifically not pine tree style.
Yeah. What am I getting? Is my assessment correct? Is it that what the juniper berry is doing?
Juniper berries.
Blasting you with pine sol?
Right. And like there's people that love that. There's people that don't. And I think in America, like we kind of got ruined. And you talk to people and everybody kind of has the exact same story.
Really?
And it's always, I haven't had gin since I was 17 in my friend's basement. And if it's a guy telling the story, it's because they ended up this and there was unfortunate physical characteristics that happened. Or if it's a girl telling the story, it's I was holding my friend's hair back or she was holding my hair back and I've never had gin since. And that's cool, but it's time to move beyond that. And I think there's a big enough variety in gin now. Because that's the cool thing about gin is that there's actually really almost no rules. And the only rule for gin is that it has to have the predominant flavor of juniper. But what the fuck does predominant mean?
Is that what the law says? Predominant?
Yeah, the law says predominant. I don't know. No one knows what that means. And how do you classify it? Because I can tell you, like if you're telling me, if you're the Johnny Law, I'm going, yeah, that's exact. Few gin tastes predominantly of juniper, of course. But if you're not Johnny Law, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't taste at all like juniper. You can't prove what predominant means.
How are you actually introducing the juniper into the gin in the process?
So in the process of making gin, there's you're going to start off with a distillate. For the most part, it's going to be vodka because gin is effectively flavored vodka. And there are 3 ways that you can do it. One, you can just soak the juniper berries in the spirit and then filter the spirit off. 2, you can throw the berries and all your other botanicals actually into the pot of a still and redistill it so then it comes out perfectly clear. Or you can have your botanicals in what is called a gin basket, which is kind of in the vapor path on the still. So the vapor goes through the botanicals.
Wow.
So there's 3 ways of doing it. We do a distilled gin, which means that they actually put all the botanicals in the pot. I just think you get a much more intense flavor that way, which is potentially not what you want. Maybe you want a more subtle flavor.
What am I when I'm describing my pine tree thing? Is that what juniper tastes like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How are you getting it to not be so aggressively piney? I don't know how do you mellow that out a bit for me?
How many juniper berries you put in?
Okay.
Like that's it.
Simple as that.
It's not super difficult. Like it's how much juniper you put in versus every other botanical that you have in. It's like Few breakfast gin uses 5 botanicals. Few American gin uses 11 botanicals. And there's just different recipes, and you can go find all sorts of other ones. Like if you don't like the pine tree, I always recommend trying Blue Coat gin. It's a fantastic gin.
What's it called again?
Blue Coat.
Like you would wear a coat?
Exactly. And full disclosure, I used to own that as well. But
try out Fuse gin first.
I
guess you can only get it here.
Yeah, you can only get Few gin in Illinois, but you can get Blue Coat all over the world.
How would you... I'm bogarting the conversation again.
I'm just listening again.
Yeah.
It's good.
How would you recommend that I try my gin? Just straight drink it, or do you recommend like a gin and tonic, or
basically the same? Like,
what's the easiest starting point for gin? I'm again asking very selfishly because I've never appreciated that alcohol.
Really,
And I
it's
would
just-
like to understand it.
Yeah, G&T is just going to be the classic way, and that's probably how an absurd percentage of gin gets drank. A lot of people in the booze business a couple years ago tried to make warm gin shots a thing. It didn't work. Nobody liked doing warm gin shots.
Wonder why.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Like
but-
sake? Like they're trying to
sake.
make it like a sake kind of.
Yeah, it was. I didn't get it. I was all for it because I was trying to sell gin at the time. Like, yeah, warm gin shots. Let's fucking go. But, it just didn't work. So I mean, certainly gin and tonics, martinis are a classic way. It kind of depends what you like. You know,
Negroni. That's usually where I get it, especially in the summer.
Yeah, Negronis are my jam for gin.
Yeah.
But that's fine. Like some people like gimlets. Like gimlets are fantastic. I love gimlets. I love Negronis. I don't typically do gin and tonic because I don't like the texture of spirit and bubbly.
I don't like tonic. It's the problem for me there.
Hey, me neither. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's like I wish I liked the gin and tonics. They look awesome.
Yeah. I'd rather just drink it on ice, to be honest.
I should try it both ways.
Try
And
both.
I will.
Try it both ways and see what you like.
Yeah.
And if you don't like big heavy juniper bombs, don't drink Beefeaters. Try Bombay. Try Blue Coat. Try Few. Try Leopold makes a great gin.
Was it
St. George makes a
Hendrick's?
great gin. Hendricks makes a great
Was
gin.
that the one that's like less piney?
Yeah, they do. They have the cucumbers.
So I don't know. I had one. I was like, okay, I guess I don't hate gin. I didn't realize it wasn't Pine Blast.
Yeah, Hendricks is really good.
Okay. Something else, maybe we can end on this conversation here. Something that has been in my awareness and consciousness over the last couple of years. It's interesting. There's been a movement away from alcohol at a lot of places. I see a lot more mocktails, non-alcohol parts on the menu. Is this something that you're seeing? Is this something that concerns you as a spirit maker?
It's definitely something I see, and I think the truth is a little bit harder to ascertain. There's definitely a lot of noise about it. What actually moves in the marketplace, I think, is a little bit less clear. Certainly, the younger generation is less motivated by alcohol than people in my generation were. That said, I don't think that people will continue to pay $15 and $20 for mocktails. I just don't think people will continue paying that. People are not going to pay $35 for a bottle of flavored water. People want to pay $3 for a bottle of flavored water. People want to pay $5. Maybe they'll pay $7. But are you going to pay $35 for water that tastes like whiskey? I don't think that lasts long.
Right.
And so you see it a lot, but it's unclear what the actual merit and how long it will last. A trend to low and no, yes, that's definitely there. And
Why do you think that's happening? Just anecdotes, maybe.
I think a lot of it is, frankly, social media. And I'm a man of a certain age, and so when I was in high school, there were no cell phone cameras everywhere, so you could have a red cup in front of you with impunity.
Interesting.
Nowadays, if you have a red cup in front of you, it's going to be on
Sorry,
Twitter,
you're never hired again anywhere. Yeah.
and you get thrown out of school, and you get tossed off of your team, and so you start off a lot of your teenage life where, and again, I'm not dumb. Like I know my kids do, at least usually. But it's different when the dumb stuff you do as a teenager can live with you forever, whereas all the dumb stuff I did as a teenager, still lives in the 80s, not on the internet.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a big deal that the kids are super paranoid about having that red cup being that picture, or that they're going to get blackmailed, that they're going to, someone's going to send the picture to coach, or
I didn't think of that.
all these things. I think it's a little bit different, and then you don't get it. Also, with the legalization of cannabis, that's proven pretty popular too, because you don't have to smoke it. Kids won't smoke. You can do edibles, and it's super small, right? It's really easy to hide an edible in your room. It's a lot harder to hide a bottle of whiskey in your room. which I can tell you from experience in my daughter's room. If she had just separated the liquor from the bag of weed.
Oh, no. I hope it was a bottle of Few at least.
It was not. It was liquor she stole from my wife, which is the which was the other thing that set everybody off.
That's interesting. The social media aspect I hadn't thought of. I'll tell you my personal story is I've always felt pressure to go to a bar and have a drink, or like hold a drink, I should say. You know, it felt like it was inappropriate to be there. It felt uncomfortable to not just hold something. Mm-hmm. My suspicion was maybe part of that is like people going non-alcoholic to fit in and still be part of a group, but not not be drunk.
But and that's part of it, yes. But it's also it comes from this, and it comes from 30 years of aggressive anti-drunk driving campaigns that are working, and so people are paranoid. Like even if my kids see me look at a beer, like, Daddy, you okay to drive?
Right? Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm a 220-pound man. I looked at a beer. I'm okay.
Yeah.
I drank one beer. I'm 220 pounds. I can drink one beer and 3 hours later drive.
So I was just listening to something that you had done in an interview you'd done in the past, and you talked a little bit about when you come up with a new recipe, mm-hmm. you have to submit that to the government.
Yep.
And I just never knew that. So how many recipes have you submitted, or what's the ratio of submissions to approvals? And is that something that that stops you up a lot?
No, so it depends. Formula approvals by the TTB are only for certain things. You don't need formula approval for certain classes and types, because if it's just grain distillate, it doesn't really need a formula. It's only if you do different stuff. But gin needs different. Gin, you're adding stuff, so you have to have a formula. It tends to not really be a massive block. The only challenges would be if you're using unorthodox ingredients or ingredients that are not safe for human consumption, which that's not ever an issue with few, but that's why you have to submit these things, is to make sure that the ingredients are safe. So you can't just have we got cyanide gin. It's awesome.
Tastes like almonds.
That doesn't exist, and we don't put cyanide in any of our stuff. But that's why you have to submit it. Once you kind of understand the skills to get formula approval, it tends to not be a huge deal. And so, I have had formulas that I gave up on, primarily just because I didn't care that much about them. Like I got rejected on a bunch of formulas where I was trying to mimic the flavor of certain herbs, if you will. I put that in a gin, and the TTB's like, yeah, fuck no.
That's a good idea.
Even if it's not coming from the cannabis plant, you're not copying the flavor of a cannabis plant, which drove me up the wall because of Sweetwater Brewing down in Atlanta that literally has beers on the market tailored to specific cannabis strains, and they talk about it on the bottle.
Aren't there? I haven't had any of them. Aren't there beverages and wines and beers that have weed in them?
There are. That's my next business.
Okay,
it's the next business.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Watch for Mindset out of Michigan.
Okay.
What's it called?
Mindset.
All right, we're gonna check it out.
It's a good name.
When is that coming?
Hopefully this fall.
All right, keep us appraised.
Yeah, the regulatory stuff is I don't even think about any of that stuff or the cost of any of that when I'm buying.
Yep,
a bottle of your whiskey. Interesting.
All right, let's wrap it up here. We do a section at the end called favorites, where normally it's just things that we're into that aren't maybe work related. So it tends to be books, movies, TV shows. I'll go first because I'm so excited.
And I have to look up one right now because I never have one.
I am a nerd. I play a lot of video games. Diablo 4 just came out, and I'm loving slaying demons with my friends.
Nice.
So I just want to throw that out, and I'll give a quick throwback to Nick and my childhood. A lot of our childhood friendship was based on Diablo 2, because I remember when Diablo 2 came out, we must have been 17 or something, and I would go over to Nick's house and we'd play this game together, and now they're still making it all these 20-some years later. Are you looking at the release date? When was Diablo 2 released, Nick?
2000.
Yeah, so 23 years ago, we were playing the same game. But if anybody hasn't played it, it's actually really...
Bunch of losers.
Yeah, if you're a bunch of losers like I am, I'm really enjoying this game.
I didn't even know. I'm so out of touch. I didn't even know that
it came out. Yesterday was the release date. But I did pay extra money to have early access. That's how desperate I was. Paul, you got something that's interesting to you? Something maybe relaxing that's not work related?
Yeah, I've been really obsessing over John Prine's first album over the last week. John, you don't know John Prine?
I'm the worst.
Oh my God, he actually passed a couple years ago from COVID. He was like one of the big. He was like one of those musicians that passed from COVID a couple years ago that really just kind of hit a lot of people. But like whoever it is you listen to on the regular, they listen to John Prine.
Okay. He's a guitar player?
He's a guitar player, songwriter, and...
I'm embarrassed again.
Yeah, check out his album, John Prine, and it's just amazing.
So he came out post his death?
Oh, this album came out in probably the early 70s.
Okay. I thought you said something just came out.
No, he just passed.
Oh, my bad. Excuse me.
Yes, he was he was 6-8 weeks after the COVID blew up and lockdown.
Dang.
Like he passed then. And he's a Chicago guy, actually, by coincidence, which I didn't actually know until he passed. But check out the John Prine's, any of his albums really, but John Prine, and the song Angel from Montgomery is just powerful.
I will check it out.
Maywood, Illinois, he was born.
Can you, on the guitar note, what kind of guitars do you like to play?
So my main guitar right now is a custom guitar I had built for me out of a used barrel.
Yes. I love that.
Super nerdy, but super fun. My other main guitar right now is a heavily bastardized Fender Strat that I just did some cosmetic surgery on it to make it look like Jerry Garcia's Alligator.
Oh, cool.
But a few years ago, I did a bunch of non-cosmetic surgery on it to make it sound like Jerry Garcia's Alligator.
Wasn't he like an Alembic guy?
After Alligator.
Yeah.
So Alligator was like the early 70s, Jerry. I'm a total nerd. But I'm a big Deadhead nerd. So
maybe we can plug the person that made your barrel guitar.
Yeah, at Big D Guitars on Instagram. He makes killer work. And
is he a local guy?
Yeah, he's up in Northbrook or Glenview, something like that.
Sounds like I should send him like a stack of leather and say, make me a bass guitar out of this somehow.
Oh, he would. He would love that stuff and have it. They'd wrap it in some leather. Or,
yeah, I'll check it out.
That'd be really freaking cool.
Yeah. All right, Nick.
I wonder if we could.
You're in the hot spot.
Yeah. I wonder if we could do we could tan
or with the wood from the drum.
Yeah, they did that with somebody. But I wonder if we could do a tanning in a used whiskey barrel. That we could.
Sorry, just to explain. Nick's headphones are made from old tanning drums.
Nice.
Yeah, because after a while they're just barrels, but they're round instead of shaped, and then after they're just not watertight. After a while, we fix them as many times as we can, and they just don't hold. But the big chunks of wood are still good. So.
Yeah, I got nothing but barrels for you guys. You go and tan some leather. That's so fucking cool.
It could be interesting.
That'd be so fucking cool.
I wonder if it would. Well, we'll talk.
We would not be able to put whiskey in the barrels afterwards, obviously.
No, but we use some alcohol in some spots in the finishing process but they're not going to drink it afterwards. No, that would be.
So we talked about that a few years ago. Like there's a big trend for a while of people trying to age cocktails in leather.
Was there? I didn't know that.
Yeah. We actually talked, I don't remember which guys I was talking to about it. Like, hey, man, can you guys do like food safe leather? Like, fuck no.
No.
Absolutely not.
Well, and a lot of that stuff, I would imagine that a lot of the flavor components are going to be the same thing that you were already, because we use tree barks and we use oak and chestnut and cabracho, mimosa. I mean, things that are, you would just use those tree barks and probably get the flavors that you want instead of endangering people's guts.
But yeah, it was a hot trend for a hot minute there that people were doing it.
That.
The whole, you're going to kill people kind of put a kibosh on it. But yeah, if there's a way to have like a vegan leather, which I know is contradictory, but
sacrilegious.
But if
time for you to go.
It's funny.
No, but like, human safe. Like if you could age a spirit in leather, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, there probably is a way to do it, but you would just use component parts.
I don't know.
What do you got? You got a favorite, Nick?
I never have a favorite. Yeah. I'll just do a TV. I've been watching Silo, which is just a show that came out on Apple TV. You
It's supposed to be good.
I watched the first episode. I was like, this is pretty good.
I like it. I mean, it's still going, so I don't know how it's going to end up, but I'm always
honestly,
intrigued.
It seems like a solid B.
Better than saying Ted Lasso, because everybody likes Ted Lasso.
Yeah, no. It's another take on like the post-apocalyptic thing, which is like it's like a new take on that. So
That's why I like it.
You're not into that, but yeah.
Very dystopian.
I'll use that.
Paul, thanks so much for
Thanks,
coming
Paul.
on to my
Thanks for having on, boys. Good stuff.
And I'll just wrap it up here by reminding everybody, if you know somebody that's into spirits, have them check out Fuse Spirits and share the show here. Paul, that was really cool to hear about everything that you explained. So thanks again. And everybody listening, appreciate you guys very much for checking it out. And we'll see you again on the next one.